Hey everyone, for those of you that missed our second session of our Mindful Educator study, here is a short video to cover the highlights of everything that we went over, meaning that there won't be the guided meditation portion or the discussion questions, but if you want to throw those into while you watch, you can always fire up your 10% Happier app and review the discussion questions as you watch the video. So as a review, our study objectives are to understand mindfulness as a mental health support, learn and practice mindfulness skills that support stress reduction and communication in relationships, and really develop our own practice that's in line with our own individual lifestyles and what capacity we have for practicing. So after our first couple weeks of meditating together, we went through the basic course in the 10% Happier app, and we walked away with some big ideas. The first one is how to bring awareness to the breath and sensations in the body. We learned about the art of mental noting, which is labeling an experience as it arises in our practice. So an example could be warmth or coolness or any of those sensations that we're feeling in our body. We learned the first big insight behind the waterfall, and we understood how our minds often hop on trains of association, and we lastly learned the phrase, simply begin again. So I won't say much about our discussion questions, except for the last one was a big topic of conversation tonight. So what barriers can you foresee in committing to a mindfulness practice, and how might you overcome them? Which we'll talk about as we go through our presentation. So working with resistance is a big topic that I wanted to bring up that's related to the barriers we might see to a meditation practice. But because it was such a close one to my heart, I studied and researched meditation for like a year before I ever started practicing. So I just experienced a lot of resistance when I was first trying to make meditation a habit or even bring it into my life at all. So some of the things that worked for me are to change it up and try a different body posture. If you're having a hard time sitting and meditating, then maybe try and go on a mindful walk. Maybe try doing a laying down meditation or a sleep meditation before you go to bed. Meditating following exercise or movement is a really great thing that helped me. Any type of movement is a really great way to sort of calm the mind, so it feels a little bit easier to sit in a meditation. Inviting other people to join you. So a lot of people tonight commented that the New Year's challenge has been really helpful for them because they've been able to sort of have a group or see when other people meditate. So that's another great way to kind of have it stick for even after the study, is to maybe find some people who also want to continue meditating and make a group out of it. Scheduling a time to meditate. So setting a timer or an alarm, or just like really sticking to one point in the day can be really helpful. But then on the other side of that, being really flexible and finding a time in your day that seems to work. I think that for the first like 2 months of meditating, I would do it in my car after I got home from school. So that's another place that you could fit it in. And then lastly, being gracious with yourself, because nothing is lost if you miss a day or even a week. We can always go back to sort of the heart of our mindfulness practice, which is just simply beginning again. Also wanted to talk a little bit about when we'll see progress and what progress even looks like when we meditate. So we can often find immediate relief from stress and anxiety when we meditate, but that idea of equanimity or emotional balance is something that's going to appear over time. So we can really think of meditation like physically working out, where the long-term effects are going to show up with consistency and time, and really more so consistency. If we can fit in 5 minutes most days a week, we're going to start to see that progress show up faster for us. So when I was thinking about how to explain what progress looks like, what came to mind is that we're not meditating to be good meditators on a cushion. We're meditating to be better people in the world. So that is where we need to look for our progress. So the ways that we listen, the ways that we relate to our thoughts and emotions, the way that we communicate with others, those are all ways that we can judge if our meditation practice is working for us or if we're seeing progress in our meditation. I was telling the group that I don't think I'm a better, meditator today than I was the first day that I started in the ability to control my mind. We're not going to ever be able to control all of the things that come into our heads or how much we're thinking that day. The way that we need to look at it is how it's showing up for us in the real world. And no matter if I feel like I had a good meditation or a bad meditation, that meditation is still working for us. So now we're going to dive into talking about mindfulness in the classroom, which I know was a big topic that people wanted to be able to cover so that they could do it with their students. So I wanted to briefly talk about mindfulness and social emotional learning programs because they really work together in a really synergistic fashion. They're really support each other. So by targeting the three skills, attentional control, self-awareness, and emotional regulation, we're building student self-regulation to a greater extent than we could with just SEL programs alone. What mindfulness is doing is it's helping support our students with that regulation so they can think clearly enough to choose a strategy that they learned in their social emotional learning program. So this is a great graphic that I always like to go back to. That mindfulness is really that piece that kind of fits in between the stimulus and response. A lot of people find that mindfulness is sort of the missing piece to social emotional programs because it again builds that space for students to be able to access the content and the strategies that they learn in them. So when working with children or really anybody who wants to learn mindfulness, the most important foundation is going to be our own practice. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about why. So children's brains and nervous systems are not fully developed from infancy to adolescence. And honestly, I think we're still developing those in our early 20s. But what it means is those early years are really crucial for developing regulation skills. Now, we might kind of think about, well, how do we teach regulation skills, or how are those historically taught? And how they're historically taught is through sound and touch, or it's really more of like a learned behavior. And we can see a great example of this of how mothers will soothe their infants through soothing sounds and soothing touches. So I'm going to read a quote from Arlene Montgomery from the University of Texas, Austin, who I think does a really good job of sort of explaining this. She says, current scientific findings are clear that in order to regulate emotions, one of the most critical right hemisphere functions, human beings are dependent on mature brains to initially assist in the micro-regulation of their physical and emotional world. Ideally, this interactive regulation transitions back and forth over the childhood and adolescence until a person is largely self-regulating. However, at stressful times, it is necessary and appropriate to seek interactive regulation from stable others. So now to go a little bit deeper on the science, there are a couple of ways in which this transfer happens that relate to why our mindfulness practice is so essential. So the first one is emotional contagion, which is the unconscious mimicking of facial expressions, vocal expressions, postures, and instrumental behaviors of those around us, thereby catching others' emotions. So we see this all the time when we're walking down the hall and we say good morning to a colleague and we're feeling happy to see them, and so then they feel that happy feeling back. When we greet our students at the door and we're so excited to see them, and then they start to feel good about entering the classroom. Or if we're leading with calm and presence with our class, then they seem to also pick up and sort of lead with a calm presence themselves. Or if we're feeling super frazzled that day, our class might start to feel super frazzled, or maybe we have a student who's got an emotion that's kind of flowing around the classroom. The other way this transfer happens is with our mirror neurons. So that small circuit of cells in the premotor cortex and inferior parietal cortex, which are activated both when we perform a certain action and when we observe someone else performing that same action. So whether we're doing it or we're seeing somebody do it, that area in our brain is going to be activated. So, children will learn mindfulness largely by the way we are presenting it to them, because mindfulness is really this innate ability that we all possess. But when we teach it as a skill, there are some ways that we're able to give this to students with an easier access point. I would say that children largely learn the same ways as adults, except for they tend to be better at it. And I'll give some examples about why. So, children are masters of being in their bodies and being able to visualize with their minds. They don't tend to have as much gunk or things going on that they really tend to pick up mindfulness so much easier than I ever did. But because they're so great at being in their bodies and visualizing with their minds, we can try mindfulness practices that are physical experiences or involve visualization, again, as that entry point for our students. So, an example could be doing a practice of mindful listening. This could be done with a bell or a vibratone. I use a vibratone when I work with some students. So just hitting a bell and then listening to the sound from the start to finish. We can do mindful breathing exercises like square breathing and 5-finger breathing. We just want to make sure that we're really teaching them how to notice what it feels like when we do these breathing exercises. How does it feel to breathe in? How do we feel afterward? Prompting them to really notice the sensations of breathing. Mindful walking is a great entry point for students and is especially great for walking students to lunch or like walking them in a line. I used this with one of my classes that I was having a particularly hard time keeping in a straight line, but just kind of teaching them to notice the way that their feet feel against the ground or notice what they see and what they hear and what they smell when they're walking through the school or walking to a certain place. We can try mindful stretching and yoga, which we can either do standing or in our seats. We can try adding in visualization. So, an example of this is when we tell kids to smell the soup and blow the soup, and really having them visualize that they have a bowl of soup in front of them. Also, hot cocoa breathing. So, imagining that they're holding a cup of hot cocoa and they're breathing that smell in and then blowing on it to cool it off. And then the last one is really just talking about and naming feelings and emotions. We do this already within the second step curriculum. We can embed it into morning meetings, and the zones of regulation is another really great resource for just getting kids to start talking about and noticing their emotions and their feelings. So, in an email that is sent to you, you will get this flyer, which was developed in incredible collaboration with our counselors. So thank you to our amazing counselors for so many of these resources. But these will just be resources for you to use in your classrooms with your students whenever you feel ready to try a mindfulness exercise. There are videos, different sites that are great for practicing mindfulness, like Mind Yeti, the Go Noodle Flows, Headspace. We have mindfulness activity cards, so a lot of different activities that you can use with your class, and then some other strategies and resources for regulation and naming emotions. For next Wednesday, we will be diving into a new course on stress. So we will have 2 options to complete for next week. The first one is phrases for stress. So this course is really going to be about how we sort of navigate that mental chatter or that internal dialogue that is attributed with stress. And then the second one is going to be Stress Better with Sebene Selassie, who's really going to dive into the science of stress and then talk about how we can help support our body's physical response to feeling stress. And that was our study for January 20th. I hope this video was helpful in kind of hitting all of the highlights that we discussed. Please feel free to reach out if you have any questions or need any support. And I look forward to seeing all of you guys next Wednesday.